more valuable, a piece of art or a human life? In World War II, this was a major concern. Today, I'm going to inform you about, first, the evacuation of the Louvre in France, second, the destruction of architecture in Italy, and third, the theft of art in Russia. I'd first like to begin by talking about the evacuation of the Louvre in France. When the French got word of the German invasion, they began to quickly assemble all of the art pieces, and they packaged them and shipped them to different chateaus and castles all throughout the countryside. The Mona Lisa had her own private ambulance, and it was set at a controlled humidity level so that the person who was riding with her, by the time they got to her end chateau, the person had passed out due to the humidity level, but the artwork was in perfect condition. And then at the chateau, she even had her own room with a guard. The Winged Victory was the most challenging for the French to evacuate because it is actually made up of millions of little pieces. And they were worried that when they brought it down the stairs, if it would shatter, it would be in 1,000 pieces, and oh my goodness, what would you do? But they were able to safely take it down and evacuate it. And by the time the Germans reached France, the Louvre was virtually empty. 71 enormous wooden crates were built in the spring of 1939. The paintings from the Prado were packed in those crates, and a train made its way to Geneva with what was probably the most precious freight in terms of our cultural inheritance that was ever committed to the iron rails, writes R. Dawn on September 3rd, 1989, in an article entitled Art View in Masterpieces Caught Between Two Wars in the New York Times. Second, I would like to talk about the destruction of architecture in Italy. Italy, as you all know, is one of the great centers for art. It is home to Rome and Pisa and Florence and pretty much all of the art revolutions took place there. When America first reached Italy, there was a strong problem with looting and the fact that America bombed Italy without discretion to what architectures were historically important and what wasn't. So General Eisenhower declared that the military was to respect the monuments as far as the war allows. Unfortunately, this declaration was tested a few months after he said this with the building of Monte Cassino, because the Germans had pretty much captured it, and it was on a very strategic mountain that the Americans felt they had to have. So, for a month, or close to a month, they were just fighting continuously with Germany until they decided that they had to bomb it in order to take the mountain. So then when they did bomb it, it was the most bombs ever during the war ever put onto one building. and they destroyed it, along with around 1,000, well, I don't think, not everyone who, sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. Around 1,000 people, Italians, decided that they were going to hide in the monastery because they didn't think that it would be bombed. But then when America did bomb it, they died. But not a single German died in the bombings because they were around the monastery and not in it. So then after it was bombed, it was used as a fortress for the Americans, or for the Germans, until 50,000 deaths later, the Americans were finally able to capture Monte. And Lynn H. Nicholas, in her book The Rape of Europa, writes, never had works of art been so important to a political movement, and never had they been moved about on such a vast scale, fawns in the cynical and desperate games of ideology, greed, and survival. Italians were very attached to their artwork, and in Florence, they were worried that after the bombings of Monte Cassino, America would bomb Florence without any hesitation, and that the city would be destroyed. When America did bomb Florence, however, they only needed to bomb the railroad, and this they did successfully without hurting any of the historical architecture. And Florence was evacuated before the bombings with all the movable art. The art that wasn't movable, such as Michelangelo's statues, including the statue of David, were sheltered in different ways, such as the statue of David was encased in a brick, for lack of a better word, tomb, and others were covered in sandbags to protect them. When the Germans, 2 days before the Germans were to evacuate Florence, however, they decided that they were going to bomb Florence. And they bombed Florence's central bridges that were all designed by Michelangelo, and basically destroyed the city. Now I'm going to talk about Pisa. Pisa remained in the war technically. It was bombed heavily, and it went through a lot of different invasions, but the tower and the cathedral, they remained unscathed. However, the most important structure, at least for the Italians, was the Campo Santo, which is a medieval cemetery. And this was bombed pretty heavily, and all of the artwork in there was destroyed due to the melting tar. It is, to this day, still being restored, and right now they basically only have virtual images of how it used to look. Another quote is, the entire issue is about righting a historic wrong, says Sharon Fletcher, Executive Director of the International Foundation of Art Research, IFAR. These cases are more poignant because of the emotional and ethical as well as legal issues involved. In the article, and this was in the article entitled Complex Justice in a Nazi Looting Case in the Christian Science Monitor by A. Austin in November 2006. I'm lastly going to talk about Russia. That's Monte Cassino. This is Florence, and that's the Campo Santo. And this is Russia, and the, oh, sorry. Okay, well, in Russia, the Hermitage had to be evacuated, and it had already been evacuated before during the other wars, so it was pretty easy, except for the Hermitage had 4 times the art of the Louvre, which by the time the Germans reached Russia, they only had 1 million pieces out evacuated, and so they lived, during that winter they lived in the cellar beneath the Hermitage, and by the end of the winter 46 people had died due to freezing. Towards the end of the war, when Russia was invading Germany, they went looking they went looking for their original artworks, but they also stole many of the German artworks, and now they refuse to give them back due to the fact that they say Germany, they lost 1 million lives in the war, and so they feel that the art is compensation for the lives lost. So today I've informed you about, firstly, the evacuation of the Louvre, second, the destruction of architecture in Italy, and lastly, the theft of art in Russia. I hope that I've informed you how the art the war has influenced more than just the loss of human life, and it has also influenced art.